As an undergraduate English major, a question I often like to ask people is if they enjoyed their high school English class. When I asked people this question, I kept hearing the same conclusions again and again. They hated it. And why did they hate it? They hated it because they often found the books they were reading to be uninteresting or they didn't understand them, particularly because they weren't applicable, weren't written in modern English, or were no longer relevant to people living in the 21st century. Outside of those reasons, many of the people I talked to simply thought a lot of the books they were reading were dull and boring. And you know what? I, as someone who really enjoys studying English and has a deep love of literature, including many of the so-called classics, I agree. I found that many of the books I was reading in class were no longer applicable or relevant to my life, and a lot of them were just dull and boring. Along with that, many of the books I was reading in class were written well before I was alive, with most of them being written in the 18th or 19th century. That means most of these books were written to be relevant for my great, 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 great grandparents, not me. Most of the books that you and I read in our English classes are not books I think we should be teaching to students or recommending to readers inside or outside the classroom, particularly at ages where people are getting into true literature, like middle school and high school age students. I've completed 12 English classes as an undergrad. Other than my undergraduate thesis, I'm completely done with all of the English classes needed for my degree. With that being said, that means I've sat in English class in the last 3 years for nearly 500 hours. That doesn't include all the thousands of hours I've spent outside of class, reading, writing, doing research, and the hundreds of other hours I've spent at every other level of education. Out of all those hours I've spent reading and studying English, there's only been one novel and a handful of excerpts I've read for class that were written within my lifetime. Now, is it really the case that there's only been one novel and a handful of excerpts written within my lifetime that were worth reading and studying? Absolutely not. If anything, we're probably in the greatest era of writing in all of human history. There's never been greater access to English education or greater access to publication ever before in history. The number of authors being published and the number of books being published annually has only increased as time's gone on. That, along with the multitude of services that allow people to rate and share books they enjoy, such as New York Times bestsellers and NPR book reviews, and Goodreads, which is basically Facebook for books, there are multiple avenues for people to weed out the bad books and find 21st century gems. Now, if we have a seemingly endless amount of modern books to choose from, the capacity to figure out which ones are good and which ones are bad without actually having to read each book ourselves, and the opportunity to share these books with others, why shouldn't we do it? Why aren't we currently doing it? On the other hand, am I saying that we should eliminate all old authors, that there are no good old authors that are worth reading? Absolutely not. Of course, there are plenty of great pieces of classic literature that are excellent and certainly worth reading and teaching. However, by and large, most of the pieces we're reading in class are not those pieces. Those good pieces are few and far between in class, and those good pieces we read in class of classic literature should be considered the exception, not the rule. Now, I know every English teacher out there is saying, well, Spencer, what about having a unified literary canon? Or what about children learning vocabulary words that are used more often in older texts that we don't currently find in newer texts? Or whatever other reason they come up with that we should be teaching older texts instead of newer texts. Well, I hear you, and on one hand, I see your point, and I understand that this model is not perfect. There certainly could be some things that students miss out on with this model. However, the things they would miss out on are extremely minor compared to the benefits of better understanding, enjoying, and relating to the text they're reading. I believe many teachers are hesitant to teach newer texts because they're worried about disrupting the English literary canon, Well, if you want to talk about the canon for a moment, the current status quo of the canon among non-academics is mostly discussing the canon in the context of hating those books that they read in class. I mean, wouldn't it be so much better if the English-speaking population was a population that loved reading and in turn became lifelong readers? I see no reason why we can't have a unified canon of modern texts. It's pretty well established that many modern authors are going to go down with some of the greatest of all time, such as J.K. Rowling, James Patterson, Stephen King, and many other modern authors. Why aren't we teaching them in our English classes? I know your first thought is, are you really saying that we should be teaching Harry Potter to middle school and high school students? Yes, I absolutely am. There is absolutely no reason why we can't teach things like theme, characterization, plot development, setting, diction, syntax, or whatever else it is that you may be learning in your English class through a Harry Potter book. If possible, why don't we give students a book they're actually going to enjoy along the way? I believe making sure people understand the difference between onomatopoeia and alliteration should not be the primary goal of English teachers, but instead creating a populace of lifelong readers should be the highest priority, far above using awful old texts because they incorporate more technical concepts than a modern text does that's actually palatable for students to read instead of looking at the summary 5 minutes before class starts. The most important reason I advocate for reading modern authors over older authors is because something older authors can't do is write in the context of the here and now. 21st century authors are able to account for current events, current societal problems, current technology, and modern English words and speech. Do you remember slogging through Shakespeare in high school and not even understanding what's going on in the scene? Me too. In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the character Casca, when he doesn't understand something, says, "But for my own part, it was Greek to me." You know what, Shakespeare? I agree. When I feel like I'm reading your novels, it feels like it's like reading Greek to me. Many of you may be asking, well, I'm never going to be in an English class again, so why should I care? Well, if you're a parent or planning on being one, don't you want your children to have the best education possible? Wouldn't you love if your children enjoyed reading? If you're a teacher, don't you want these same things? Don't you want your students to enjoy reading and look forward to coming to class? Plus, from a simply utilitarian perspective, wouldn't this cut down on cheating? I mean, there's a SparkNotes or Schmoot page for pretty much every traditional text taught in an English class, and I feel like I've read them all at this point. Do you know how many papers I've written that I haven't read the book for? Way too many to count. And lastly, if you're someone like me who had an awful time in their high school English class and hated the books that they were reading, wouldn't you like to know what a good and modern, relevant book is like? I mean, Frederick Bachman does an excellent job discussing current societal issues while also having interesting stories on the surface. Bernice McFadden's releasing great pieces all the time. Fareed Zakaria's A Post-American World does an excellent job dissecting America's current and future role in the world. Terrence Hayes may be the best poet of all time, and he's written 6 collections that have been published within the last 20 years. I promise you, there's a multitude of excellent modern works out there. Please, don't let your bad childhood English classes stop you from enjoying all the current library of modern, excellent works we have. Whenever you get a chance, please go to your bookstore, go to a library, and pick up a good, modern, entertaining, relevant text in your life, and learn to fall in love with reading. Thank you.